Welcome to the NBA 2K G League show. I am your host, Varun Chari, and welcome to the show. So on today's episode, we are going to talk about two-way contracts because there's going to be the deadline coming up this Tuesday, March 4th, where teams can no longer sign players on two-ways after that deadline. So I'm just making this video to talk about some questions kind of going into the two-way contract deadline about different teams, some situations to kind of look for in the coming days. And then on Tuesday after the deadline, or I guess on Wednesday or sometime later in the week, I'll do a breakdown of all the two-ways that have been signed and pretty much just kind of give you my thoughts about those guys. So let's get straight into it. Before I really get into this, I do want to talk about with two-ways, it causes a trickle-down effect and also kind of like a chain with cause and effect, because one thing can cause another thing that causes another thing. So if one two-way contract player gets cut, another two-way contract player could get cut. Then that two-way contract player who just got cut could sign with a different team, which means they have to cut another two-way contract player. And then they have that two-way contract player could sign with a different team, and then they have to cut another two-way contract player. So obviously there's a lot of different things that kind of cause some dominoes to start moving. And so that's just something I did want to mention because I do always find that interesting as the season continues to keep going, especially as we get to this March 4th deadline. So the Boston Celtics. Now Brad Stevens did say after the trade deadline that they were looking to fill that 15th spot. Now they signed Torrey Craig on the 14th spot after they moved Jaden Springer, and they still had a 15th spot available. Now the question was, what were they going to do with that spot? Well, Brad said that they were looking at their options. We know that next week is also the deadline where if a player signs with a team, then they can play in the playoffs. But after next week, if a player signs with a playoff team, they're not eligible to play in the playoffs. So that's something, if you look at why the Celtics could be waiting to see who hits the buyout market, that could be an option moving forward. But Brad Stevens did even hint that there is a possibility that we could convert one of our two-way guys. So those guys would be JD Davison or Drew Peterson. I think Anton Watson is pretty unlikely right now, given that he's not really played at the Celtics. But even, looking at JD Davison, he's spent almost all of his time this year with Maine. He's obviously Maine's, all-time scoring leader. He's kind of one of the best players right now in Maine history, but do the Celtics look to convert him? And there's a reason I'm bringing him up specifically, because he has played on 3 two-way contracts. So he is no longer eligible to come back to the Celtics after this season on a two-way. And so now the Celtics have to think, do we want to keep him in our organization long term? So those are some situations to keep in mind with JD. But looking at Drew Peterson, he's actually played some spot-up minutes at points with the Celtics when he's been up with the main team. And so he's also somebody that maybe the Celtics do look at converting. And if they convert one of these guys to a standard contract, that opens up a two-way spot for that player moving into March 4th deadline, and they can then bring another two-way contract player by Tuesday. But last year the Celtics converted Neemias Queta after March 4th, so they didn't end up signing another player on that two-way. So it's very likely they could do the same thing and just convert one of those guys after the season ends. Alright, moving on to the Brooklyn Nets. A couple of guys who have been standing out with the Long Island Nets is Drew Timme, the former Gonzaga product, and Tyson Etienne, who has also been playing really well. He's a guard with Long Island. He's been playing point guard minutes and guard minutes at times. So, those guys have really been standing out. They've been getting NBA interest. It'll be interesting to see if they actually do get a call up by Tuesday's deadline. So that's just something to monitor with Long Island. Chicago. So the Bulls still have EJ Liddell and Emanuel Miller, and they recently waived Adama Sanogo so they could sign Jameer Young. So EJ Liddell, he was with the Bulls in training camp, and he actually made the final roster on a two-way. He had to battle it out with some players and ended up being the one who made it. So he's still on a two-way currently. He hasn't played much with Chicago. That could change now that Chicago is not going to probably make the postseason. But, it's very possible that he gets some minutes finally. But, if, say, they cut him, they could always sign another player. Emanuel Miller, who's probably more newer than EJ Liddell, he's Leonard Miller's brother. He's from Canada, played for the Texas Legends earlier in the season before he got called up. He's kind of like a 3-and-D type of guy who has the potential to be that type of player. So the question really is, do the Bulls want to continue to keep both of them? And so that's just something to also keep in mind with this deadline. Cleveland Cavaliers. So we got JT Thor and Emoni Bates, who I think are a couple of players just to kind of keep an eye out on this deadline. Now, there's also Luke Travers, but I just think it's very unlikely for them to waive their draft pick, who they kind of just signed this year. I think they'll give him at least a full year and then see if they want to bring him back for next season. But Emoni Bates, he's in his second year. He's not playing much with Cleveland. Them drafting Jalen Tyson didn't really help, and Emoni Bates was also under the JB Bickerstaff coaching, so he hasn't played much. He's been injured from the beginning of this past year. He had I think a stress fracture in his foot, so he's been in the process of trying to recover. So he's somebody to definitely look out on, definitely keep an eye on. We've seen some guys from the 2023 draft who were on two-ways who have been getting cut, like Seth Lundy, Adama. Now obviously those were guys who got hurt, but let's see what happens with Emoni Bates, because even if he gets cut now, another team could sign him. And JT Thor, he's a Hornets player from last year. He was with Team South Sudan this past Olympics, so he's somebody to also kind of look at closely, because he's not played a lot of minutes with the Cavaliers. So I'm curious to see if Cleveland's going to make some moves at the two-way deadline. Okay, for the Denver Nuggets, we're going to talk about Spencer Jones, PJ Hall, and Trey Alexander. I think it's probably unlikely one of those guys is going to get cut. They've all kind of been pretty back and forth with the Nuggets and the Grand Rapids Gold this season. To note, though, is that Grand Rapids is kind of far in terms of distance, so they're not super close to Denver, so it does take a little bit of time and commute to go back and forth. So it kind of does make sense that you'll see them kind of with the Gold for a good amount of time, then you'll see them with the Nuggets for a good amount of time. It's not like it's kind of like with some other G League teams where they're just kind of in the same facility or they're only like 20-30 minutes away. So that is something just to kind of look more closely at. Like maybe it's a possibility that one of those guys gets moved or one of those guys gets cut. I don't think Trey Alexander would. I don't know about Spencer Jones or PJ Hall, but let's see. That's just something to kind of look at. Okay, Houston Rockets. So we got Jack McVeigh. So Jack McVeigh, he was on the 2024 Australian team in the Olympics. He was pretty good with Australia, and it caught the Rockets' attention where they signed him to a two-way contract. Now, he only really played minutes in November, and kind of after that has really just been in the G League the entire time. So I'm kind of wondering what his situation is going into Tuesday's deadline, if the Rockets want to look at other players. Maybe he'll stay in the G League. I mean, he's played professionally in Australia like ever since 2019. So even if, say, he does get cut, he could very likely just go back to the NBL. But okay, so the Los Angeles Lakers. So Tuesday is important because Jordan Goodwin, who's been playing really great basketball with the Lakers, was signed to a two-way contract after the trade deadline, and he's played really great minutes for the Lakers. I think the Lakers will most likely sign him to a regular roster spot because they want him eligible for the playoffs. I think next week is the playoff deadline for guys who want to be playoff eligible, so the Lakers do need to sign him on a contract for that to happen. Everybody's kind of saying that the most likely thing is them cutting Cam Reddish, which is probably what will end up happening. But if they do that and sign Goodwin, they do have the option to bring another player on a two-way contract. And who knows, maybe they bring back Quincy Oliveri or they bring some other players from their G League team up, or they look outside the organization. Very unlikely they'd sign a center because they already have Trey Jemison, they have Christian Koloko. So them looking outside the organization, maybe for other players at different positions, would probably be a good move for the Lakers for March 4th. Alright, so for our next player, we're going to talk about Zyon Pullin. He was with the Miami Heat's G League team. He actually signed a two-way contract after he went undrafted by the Heat this summer. He's somebody that was having a really good stretch right after the showcase in the regular season started. So the Grizzlies signed him on a two-way. He's somebody that's been looking really good. I think it'd be pretty quick for them to cut him so early. So I think he's going to stick past this March 4th deadline. But actually kind of segueing into the Heat here, Josh Christopher, he hasn't played a lot of minutes with the Miami Heat. He was a standout to Heat's G League team last year, and then had a good summer league, and then he got a two-way after that. And so he's somebody I also wonder, are they going to look at giving him more minutes maybe down the season if, say, the Heat end up missing the play-in, or do they decide to move on and give his spot to somebody else? So just some other things to look at. And for Josh Christopher, this is a really pivotal time in his career because he's in his fourth year on a two-way contract, so he's no longer eligible next season to play on a two-way anymore. So this is a really important rest of the season, honestly, for him. And then going into the New York Knicks, we saw that Ariel Hukporti had actually torn his MCL, or his meniscus, and he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks. You see Mitchell Robinson is coming back, but Robinson does have injury issues. He's had health issues, as we all know. So do the Knicks look at bringing in another player on a two-way, maybe another center, to kind of just bring in some more depth as they kind of finish the rest of the season? But to do that, they'd have to cut one of their two-way contract players, which would either be Matt Ryan, Kevin McCullough Jr., or Jacob Toppin. Now, Jacob Toppin has been with the organization for quite some time. He hasn't played a lot with the Knicks, but it seems like the Knicks like him enough that Tibbs has kept him around at this point. So I really wonder if Matt Ryan would be the one getting cut. I mean, Matt Ryan, again, like we talked about earlier, he's been on two ways for quite some time, and regular roster spots. So it wouldn't be shocking to see, even if he does get cut, if he ends up on a different NBA team. But he's also in his last year that he can play on a two-way, so that's also something to keep in mind. He ends up getting cut, he signs with another team, say it's a two-way, then another two-way player gets cut, they sign for a different team. So it starts creating these cause and effects and these chains. And if the Knicks decide to go that direction, that would probably be the most logical sense, because part of why they signed Matt Ryan was because they needed shooting after the Landry Shamet injury, and now that Landry Shamet's back, they probably don't really need the shooting as much. Now, Ryan Rollins, as of this video, is nearing his 50-game limit on his two-way contract. He has 1 game left, and so the Bucks do have 14 roster spots, and so they could convert Ryan Rollins' two-way contract to a regular one and then sign another player on a two-way. Now, it's possible they could look outside the organization, or they could, go with somebody on the Herd. Now, the Herd aren't very good this year. They've been not playing great, so maybe they look outside. I mean, we just saw they sign Pete Nance, so it wouldn't be shocking if they do the same thing again. But I really like their point guard. I think his name is James Akinjo. I watched him recently when they played against the Capital City Go-Go, and he's not afraid to go out and take a charge. He does the scrappy things, and he also is leading the G League in assists right now. I think he's averaging 7 to 8 a game. So he is definitely a point guard for sure. And do the Bucks look at bringing him in on a two-way contract? I think the way these GMs and execs look is, if they're looking at the margins of a roster, obviously not the stars, but the players kind of like around that, they're always going to be looking at ways to improve it, but kind of on the cheapest dime, to be honest. And if they can get a really efficient and talented player on a contract that's not really expensive, it's a huge win for them. And if they find a player that could do that better than Ryan Rollins, they'll do it. I mean, we looked at what Joe Cronin said about the Portland Trailblazers last year after the season ended. He told his guys, my job is to find players to make the team better. Your job is to stop me from doing that. And so, that's part of the business side of the NBA. So that's just something to kind of look at. Do the Bucks look at another point guard behind Ryan Rollins? I'd say Ryan Rollins is kind of their third point guard, especially after they trade for Kevin Porter Jr., because they knew that he's going to be nearing his 50-game limit as well. And those were just some things to kind of look at. Do they look at another point guard? So yeah, let's see what happens. Okay, so for the OKC Thunder, we got Alex Ducas. He has not really played with the Thunder this year. He's definitely a shooter. You're kind of looking at another shooter that you can have on your roster. That's something that the Thunder really do lack, is they don't have a lot of three-point shooters. And so obviously they like Alex Ducas. They signed him immediately after the draft and on a two-way. And he didn't play summer league because he was hurt. But the question is, do they look at keeping him, or do they look at maybe like a 3-point shooter like Miller Kopp, who, has been playing really good with the OKC Blue. I believe he's shooting like 45% from 3. He's having a really great year in terms of shooting. So, do they sign him as a possibility? But, we don't know. Again, it seems like the fact they've kind of kept Ducas around, he seems kind of like a project type of player in terms of somebody they want to kind of keep in their organization with the Blue. Kind of like what they did with Lou Dort, we've seen with Aaron Wiggins, and kind of see his progress as he kind of keeps moving in his NBA career with the Thunder. So if anything happens, I don't think it'll happen right now, but we could see something change this summer, if they feel like he's not really improving or not really working out the way they were hoping. Now, the Sacramento Kings, they're interesting because we know that they had a coaching change. Now, I'm not entirely sure how Doug Christie feels about Mason Jones and Isaac Jones because, it wasn't like they were playing a whole ton even under Mike Brown, but, Mike Brown's praised Mason Jones a lot because of his, his character, and then Mason Jones, you saw he lost a lot of weight during Summer League, so he's obviously impressed the Kings organization. And then Isaac Jones has had some good minutes at points when they've needed him with Sacramento. I mean, there was a point with the Stockton Kings where he was getting like 40 a game. So, he's looked really good too at points. So the question is, do they keep both of them? Do they convert one of those guys? Because they technically have 13 players on the roster. They have to sign a 14th. So do they convert one of those guys and then sign another two-way contract player by Tuesday's deadline? So just something to kind of keep looking at. Now, the San Antonio Spurs last year signed David Duke. He was playing with the Delaware Bluecoats and then got called up. He hasn't played a whole ton of minutes with San Antonio, but he's obviously played with the Spurs system in Austin, so he definitely would know the Spurs system. Now, if the Spurs are going to kind of try to lose at this point to get draft picks, you might as well just kind of see what happens with David Duke and just give him a chance to play some NBA minutes. He was drafted by the Nets, I think in 2021 or 2022 round. So, it might be just a chance to see, okay, so now let's see what he can do with NBA minutes. The Toronto Raptors, about a couple of months ago, signed AJ Lawson after they had cut DJ Carton, who was dealing with a ankle injury. So AJ Lawson's kind of like that 3-and-D type of guard. He was making shots last year with the Dallas Mavericks, but then he got cut during training camp, and then he signed with the Long Island Nets. He's had a good year, I'd say, with Long Island. I saw him play when he played against the Capital City Go-Go. I thought he looked really good. So it was cool to see him get called up. He's actually from Canada, so seeing him get called up to the Raptors was also pretty cool too. But the question is, do they want to look at another player or do they want to keep him? I mean, AJ Lawson was even selected for the G League Next Up game, so I think they'll keep him. But because right now they're kind of healthy in terms of the shooting guard spots. They have RJ Barrett, they have Jacoby Walter, so their guys are healthy. And so it seems like they'd probably keep him, but you never know. Maybe they decide to move on and look for another player. Elijah Harkless of the Utah Jazz. We saw the Jazz had Jason Preston to start the season with, and they cut him because Preston had an injury. So then they signed David Jones Garcia of the Mexico City Capitanes, who they cut, and then signed Elijah Harkless kind of in the new year this year. So Harkless is definitely a scorer. He was a first round pick in the G League draft of 2023. And he's really worked himself up to get to where he is. I mean, he played with the Clippers G League team, played the Summer League team, and then was having a really good scoring outburst, with the start of his season. And the Jazz gave him a call up. So he's played a little bit with the Jazz, but those were when guys were getting hurt. And so the question is, do the Jazz continue to look at other players on that two-way contract spot? And so that's just something to kind of also keep in mind. Alright, so moving to our last player of this video is Justin Champagnie of the Washington Wizards. Now, I think Champagnie will get his contract converted. He's been playing good minutes with the Wizards actually since December, and he's been in the rotation. He still is technically. So, he's somebody I think that at least should get his two-way converted. And if they decide to convert his two-way, they will have an open two-way for Tuesday's deadline. I'll do a video about this in the future, but the Wizards made some trades which kind of just changed the landscape of the Capital City Go-Go's roster. And so if they do decide to convert Champagnie, they now have the option to sign another two-way contract player. And so I think they should sign a point guard because I like AJ Johnson playing for the Go-Go on assignment, but I think he's still young. The game still needs to slow down for him. He has to learn to make the right reads. And so until he kind of does that, it's kind of hard for the Go-Go to have a really good point guard besides maybe Kira Lewis Jr., but we've seen even Kira Lewis has been hurt at points with the Go-Go. So the question is, do they look to get another point guard with that two-way if they convert Champagnie? So that's just something I've been kind of looking at more closely, but who knows, maybe they sign a different player that they want to look at on that two-way. And it always seems like the players they sign on two-way contracts are never really guys in their first year, but typically guys who are in their second or third year that they want to bring back because they kind of feel like they have the experience, and it even seems like that with their G League team too. So, but yeah, I just want to talk about some things going into Tuesday's deadline with two-way contract players and with teams and kind of their situations. We'll obviously see what really happens by Tuesday, and yeah, I'll have a part 2 after Tuesday. And if you watch this video, feel free to subscribe, like, or dislike, because hey, you do you. So this is the NBA 2K G League show. I'm your host, Varun Charya, and have a great day.